The fence post cracked clean through under Rachel Brennan's hand, sending splinters into her already bleeding palm as she tried to mend what the last storm had broken. And she knew with absolute certainty that without help she would lose everything her late husband had died trying to build. Rachel stood in the Wyoming Territory heat of 1876, surveying the wreckage of what had once been a proud cattle ranch just outside Belmont. 3 months had passed since Thomas Brennan had taken a fall from his horse that broke his neck, leaving her alone with 200 acres, 40 head of cattle, and debts she could barely comprehend. The townspeople had offered their condolences, their casseroles, their pitying looks. What they had not offered was the kind of help she truly needed. Not that she would have accepted it anyway. She was 24 years old, and pride was about the only thing she had left besides this failing ranch and the clothes on her back. Rachel wiped the blood from her palm onto her already dirty skirt and reached for another post from the pile Thomas had cut before he died. The wood was heavy, awkward in her hands, but she refused to acknowledge the impossibility of what she was attempting. If she could just get the fence repaired, the cattle would stop wandering onto the neighboring property. If she could keep the cattle contained, she could eventually sell them. If she could sell them, she might be able to pay at least some of what she owed. The logic was sound even if her body was failing her. "Madam, that post is going to fall before sunset if you set it that way." Rachel spun around, nearly dropping the wooden beam on her foot. A man sat astride a dusty brown quarter horse about 20 feet away, his weathered hat pulled low enough that she could not quite make out his features in the glaring afternoon sun. She had not heard him approach, which unsettled her more than his uninvited observation. "I did not ask for your opinion," Rachel said, her voice sharper than she intended. She turned back to her work, shoving the post into the hole she had dug, ignoring the way her arms trembled with the effort. "No, madam, you did not." The stranger's voice was calm, unhurried. "But that does not make what I said any less true." Rachel gritted her teeth and continued packing dirt around the base of the post. Behind her, she heard the creak of leather as the man dismounted. Heavy footsteps approached through the dry grass. "I would appreciate it if you moved along," she said without turning around. "I have work to do. I can see that." He was closer now, just a few feet away. "I can also see that you are setting these posts too shallow and at the wrong angle. Come winter, the whole line will collapse." Heat flooded Rachel's face, part anger and part shame because she suspected he was right. She had watched Thomas repair fences 100 times, but watching and doing were entirely different skills. Still, she would be damned before she admitted as much to a stranger who had inserted himself into her business without invitation. "Then it is fortunate this is my fence and my problem," she said. "Isaiah Foster, madam." The man had moved into her peripheral vision now. He was tall, broad-shouldered, probably around 28 or 30 years old based on the lines beginning to form around his eyes. Those eyes were a startling blue-gray, the kind that seemed to see straight through pretense. "I have the property about 3 miles east of here. Your cattle have been getting into my grazing land, of course." Rachel's stomach sank. Another person she owed, another problem she could not solve. "I will get them contained, as I am trying to do right now." "I brought them back," Isaiah continued as if she had not spoken. "They are in your holding pen, all 14 of them." 14. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. "That was the 3rd time this month. Thank you. I will make sure it does not happen again. I am sure you will try." There was no mockery in his voice, which somehow made it worse. Mockery she could have responded to with righteous anger. This calm assessment of her failures left her nowhere to direct the frustration building in her chest. Rachel finally turned to face him fully. Isaiah Foster was studying her fence line with a critical eye, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. He wore the practical clothing of a working rancher: dusty trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, scuffed boots that had seen years of hard use. A gun belt sat comfortably at his hips, but his hands were relaxed, non-threatening. "I appreciate you returning my cattle," Rachel said with as much dignity as she could muster. "Now, if you will excuse me, I need to finish this before dark." Isaiah looked at the fence, then at her, then at the dozen remaining posts still lying in the grass. "That is about 8 hours of work for someone who knows what they are doing. For someone learning as they go, working alone, probably closer to 12. Then I had better stop wasting time talking." For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across Isaiah's face. "You are Thomas Brennan's widow." It was not a question, but Rachel nodded anyway. "I am. He was a good man, honest, fair in his dealings." Isaiah paused. "He would not have wanted you to run yourself into the ground trying to do everything alone." The presumption of it, the sheer audacity of this stranger to tell her what her own husband would have wanted, snapped the last thread of Rachel's patience. "You did not know my husband well enough to speak for him, and you certainly do not know me well enough to offer advice I did not request. I have thanked you for returning my cattle. That concludes our business. Good day, Mr. Foster." She turned her back on him and grabbed the post, yanking it free from its inadequate seating to start over. Behind her, silence stretched for several long moments. Then she heard footsteps retreating, the jingle of tack as Isaiah mounted his horse. "There is no shame in accepting help, Mrs. Brennan," he called out. Rachel did not respond. She listened to the hoofbeats fade into the distance and then, finally alone again, let the post fall from her trembling hands. She sank down onto the sun-baked earth and allowed herself exactly 1 minute of despair. 1 minute to acknowledge that Isaiah Foster was right, that she was failing, that the ranch was slipping through her fingers no matter how hard she fought to hold on. Then she stood up, picked up the post, and started again. The sun had nearly set by the time Rachel finished 3 fence posts. 3 out of 15. Her hands were a mess of blisters and splinters, her shoulders screaming in protest with every movement. She made her way back to the small house she had shared with Thomas, every step a reminder of how much work still remained. Inside, she lit a single lamp to conserve kerosene and heated water to clean her wounds. The house felt cavernous in its emptiness. She and Thomas had planned to fill it with children, with noise and laughter and the chaos of a full life. Instead, it stood as a monument to abandoned dreams, too big for one grieving widow and her failures. Rachel allowed herself a piece of bread and some cheese for dinner, carefully rationing the supplies she had left. Her bank account held exactly $17.32. The ranch owed $240 to the bank in Belmont, due in 6 weeks. The arithmetic was simple and damning. She fell into bed exhausted and woke before dawn to start again. The pattern repeated for 3 days. Rachel worked the fence line from sunrise to sunset, her progress painfully slow. She taught herself through trial and error, wasting posts with mistakes she could not afford, ignoring the pain in her body, and the growing certainty that this was a battle she could not win alone. On the 4th morning, she walked out to find Isaiah Foster already at her fence line with a wagon full of supplies and tools. "What are you doing?" Rachel demanded, marching across the field with her fists clenched at her sides. Isaiah looked up from where he was measuring post depth with a piece of marked string. "Good morning, Mrs. Brennan. Fine weather we are having. I asked you a question, and I am choosing to start with pleasantries." He straightened, meeting her angry gaze with unshakable calm. Your fence is inadequate. Until it is properly repaired, your cattle will keep wandering onto my land. Since you are clearly determined to do this yourself, the least I can do is make sure it is done correctly, so I do not have to keep playing shepherd to your herd. It was a logical argument. It also completely ignored the fact that she had explicitly told him she did not want his help. I do not need your charity. Good, because I am not offering any. Isaiah pulled a post from his wagon with easy strength. I am protecting my own interests. Your failing fence is my problem too. Consider this neighborly maintenance of the boundary between our properties. Rachel wanted to argue, wanted to order him off her land, wanted to preserve what little remained of her pride. But she was also exhausted and in pain and desperately, terribly aware that at her current pace, the fence would not be finished before the banknote came due. Before she had to admit defeat and sell everything for whatever pittance she could get. Fine, she bit out, but I will work alongside you. This is still my fence, my responsibility. Something that looked like respect flickered in Isaiah's expression. I would not have it any other way. They worked in tense silence for the first hour. Isaiah's competence was both helpful and humiliating. What took Rachel 20 minutes of struggle, he accomplished in 5. He did not comment on the disparity, simply maintained a steady pace that gradually created order from chaos. You need to set the posts at least 3 feet deep, Isaiah said eventually, his tone instructional rather than condescending. And angle them slightly toward the pasture. When you attach the rails, the weight distribution will keep everything stable. Rachel nodded, filing away the information even as she resented needing it. Your husband ever teach you any of the ranch work? Isaiah asked as they moved to the next section. Thomas thought he had time. The words came out more bitter than she intended. He was going to show me everything gradually. We had been married less than a year when he died. I spent most of that time cooking and cleaning and helping with the account books. He handled everything else. That is the way of things usually. Isaiah dug another post hole with efficient movements. Though I knew a woman up in Montana Territory who could outwork any ranch hand, run her holes spread by herself after her husband passed. Course, she had about 20 years more experience than you. It was meant to be encouraging, Rachel supposed. It mostly just reminded her how unprepared she was for the life that had been forced upon her. Did she manage to keep her ranch? Isaiah paused. No. Eventually sold it to a neighbor and moved to Denver. But she got a fair price because the land was well maintained, made a new life for herself there. I do not want a new life somewhere else, Rachel said quietly. Thomas and I chose this land together, planned our future here. I am not ready to let that go. Then you need to learn fast and work smart. Isaiah gestured to the tools he had brought. These are extras from my place. You can borrow them as long as you need. And if you are willing to listen instead of throwing me off your property, I can teach you what you need to know. Pride warred with pragmatism in Rachel's chest. Pride had sustained her through the worst of her grief, had kept her upright when everything else tried to drag her down. But pride would not repair fences or pay banknotes or save the future she had promised Thomas she would fight for. Why would you do that? She asked. You do not know me. You barely knew my husband. What do you gain from helping me? Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, focusing on the post he was setting. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of old grief. 5 years ago, I lost my wife in childbirth. The baby, too. For months after, I could barely function, could not run my ranch, could not take care of myself. I would have lost everything if neighbors had not stepped in whether I wanted them to or not. They worked my land, managed my cattle, made sure I ate and slept, saved my life and my livelihood even though I was too deep in grief to appreciate it at the time. Rachel felt her anger deflate, replaced by a reluctant kinship with this man's pain. "I am sorry for your loss. And I am sorry for yours." Isaiah met her eyes directly. "I know what it is to be proud and hurting and determined to do everything alone because accepting help feels like admitting defeat. But independence and self-destruction are not the same thing, Mrs. Brennan. There is wisdom in knowing when to let people help you, even when I did not ask for it." But the fight had gone out of her voice, especially then. A slight smile softened the harsh lines of his face. "Besides, you have asked for help. Every time you set one of these posts wrong, every time your cattle wander onto my land, you are calling out clear as church bells that you need someone. You are just using actions instead of words." The observation struck too close to truth. Rachel turned away, ostensibly to examine the fence line but really to hide the sudden sting of tears. "I do not know how to do this, any of this. Running a ranch, managing cattle, keeping the books balanced while also doing the physical labor. Thomas handled so much that I never even thought about. Now I am drowning in all the things I do not know, and asking for help feels like betraying his memory. Like admitting I was not a good enough wife to learn these things when he was alive to teach me. That is grief talking, not truth." Isaiah's voice was gentle. "You and Thomas thought you had a lifetime. There is no betrayal in being unprepared for tragedy. The only betrayal would be giving up on the dream you built together just because pride would not let you accept a hand when you needed one." Rachel scrubbed at her eyes with the back of her dirty hand. "I do not have money to pay you, did not ask for any." "Then what do you want, Mr. Foster? Nobody helps for free. There is always a price." Isaiah considered this, leaning against the wagon bed. "How about this? You cook a decent meal twice a week that I can share. Living alone, I mostly eat jerky and beans. It would be nice to have real food cooked by someone who knows their way around a kitchen. That seems like a fair trade for some ranching lessons." It was a face-saving offer, and they both knew it. The work Isaiah was doing was worth far more than a couple of home-cooked meals, but it gave Rachel a way to accept his help without feeling like a complete charity case. "3 times a week," she countered, "and I will make enough that you can take leftovers home. Deal?" Isaiah held out his hand. Rachel shook it, his calloused palm rough against her own blistered skin. "Thank you," she forced herself to say. "Truly, I know I have been ungracious about this. You have been grieving and scared and trying to survive." Isaiah released her hand and returned to work. "Nothing ungracious about that. Now let me show you the proper way to attach these rails, and tomorrow we can start on the more complicated repairs." They fell into an easier rhythm after that. Isaiah proved to be a patient teacher, explaining the why behind each technique rather than just demonstrating the how. Rachel discovered she was a quick study when pride was not blocking her ability to learn. By the time the sun set, they had completed more fence work than she had managed in the previous 4 days combined. "Same time tomorrow?" Isaiah asked as he prepared to leave. Rachel nodded. "I will start on that meal I promised. Is there anything you particularly like, Mrs. Brennan? After 5 years of my own cooking, anything you make will taste like heaven." He tipped his hat and rode off into the gathering dusk. Rachel watched him go, then turned to survey their progress. For the first time since Thomas died, the impossible felt merely difficult. It was not much, but it was something. She went inside and began planning a meal worthy of the help she had finally, reluctantly, accepted. Over the following weeks, a routine established itself. Isaiah arrived each morning around sunrise, and together they tackled the endless work of keeping the ranch functional. He taught her how to identify sick cattle, how to read the weather signs, how to budget her resources to stretch through difficult periods. In exchange, Rachel cooked meals that gradually became more elaborate as her confidence grew, and she realized Isaiah genuinely appreciated good food. They talked while they worked, sharing stories that gradually built understanding between them. Rachel learned that Isaiah had inherited his ranch from his father, that he had married his childhood sweetheart at 22, that her death had nearly destroyed him. Isaiah learned that Rachel had met Thomas at a church social in Ohio, that they had married after a whirlwind courtship and headed west to build something of their own, that she had never expected to become a widow before her 25th birthday. "You ever think about remarrying?" Rachel asked one afternoon as they mended tack in her barn. The question surprised her even as she asked it, too personal for the careful friendship they had built. Isaiah did not seem offended. "Used to think I never would. That what Mary and I had was once in a lifetime, and trying to recreate it would be an insult to her memory." He paused in his work, staring at the leather in his hands. "But lately, I have been thinking that maybe honoring her memory means living fully, not just existing. Mary would not have wanted me to spend my whole life alone and miserable." "Thomas told me something similar, actually," Rachel said quietly. "About a month before he died, we were talking about the future, making plans. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should not let grief turn me into a ghost, that I should promise to keep living, really living, not just going through motions." She swallowed hard. "I told him nothing was going to happen to him. We were young and healthy and had decades ahead of us. We never know how much time we have." Isaiah set down the bridle he had been repairing, which is why wasting it on pride or fear seems particularly foolish. There was something in his tone, in the way he was looking at her, that made Rachel's breath catch. Over these weeks of working together, she had grown to appreciate Isaiah's steadiness, his quiet competence, his unexpected kindness. She had noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled, the gentle strength in his hands, the sound of his rare laughter. She had told herself these observations were simply the natural result of spending so much time together, nothing more significant than that. But the way her heart was racing suggested otherwise. Rachel. It was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to tell you something, and I want you to know you can say no without it affecting anything between us. I will still help with the ranch, still be your friend and neighbor, no matter what your answer is." That is quite a preamble. Rachel tried to keep her voice light despite the sudden nervousness flooding her system. "What is the question? I have come to care for you these past weeks, more than I expected, more than I probably should, given that you are still in mourning." Isaiah's words came slowly, carefully chosen. "But I would be lying if I said this was just friendship on my part. And I think, maybe, it is not just friendship for you either. I see the way you look at me sometimes, the way you smile when I arrive in the mornings. I could be wrong. If I am, tell me and we will never speak of this again." Rachel's hands had stilled on the saddle she was cleaning. Her mind raced through a dozen possible responses, weighing propriety against honesty, duty to Thomas's memory against the unexpected hope blooming in her chest. "You are not wrong," she finally said. "But I do not know what that means or what to do about it. Thomas has only been gone for months. Everyone in town already whispers about me, about how I am failing at running his ranch, about how I will probably lose everything. If they knew I had feelings for another man so soon after burying my husband, the scandal would be enormous. I am not suggesting we announce a courtship in the town square." Isaiah moved closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. "But maybe we could acknowledge what is developing between us. Take time to let it grow properly without pretending it does not exist. I am willing to wait, Rachel, to move as slowly as you need. But I needed you to know that my help is not just neighborly kindness anymore. I am here because I want to be, because being near you has become the best part of my day." Joy and guilt warred in Rachel's heart. "I feel like I am betraying Thomas, like caring for you means I did not love him enough. Love is not a finite resource." Isaiah's voice was infinitely gentle. "Loving someone new does not erase what you felt for someone you lost. If Thomas loved you the way I suspect he did, he would want you to be happy, to find companionship and affection again. It feels too soon." "Maybe it is." Isaiah picked up the bridle again, returning to his work. "Maybe we need more time to be sure what we are feeling is real and not just two lonely people finding comfort in each other. But I wanted you to know where I stand. That when you are ready, if you ever are ready, I would very much like to court you properly. With all the time and respect your late husband's memory deserves." Rachel nodded slowly, trying to process the tumult of emotions his confession had triggered. "Can we just continue as we are for now? Learning to run the ranch, becoming better friends, seeing where things naturally lead without forcing anything. That sounds perfect." Isaiah's shoulders relaxed slightly. "And Rachel, thank you for being honest with me, for not pretending you do not feel anything just because it would be simpler." They returned to their work, but something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement of possibility, of a future that might hold more than just survival and grief. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That evening, after Isaiah had gone home, Rachel sat in her empty house and thought about Thomas, about the love they had shared, brief but genuine, about the future they had planned that would never come to pass. And she thought about Isaiah, about his patience and kindness, about the way he had helped her without asking for anything in return, about the unexpected feelings he had awakened in her scarred heart. "I will always love you," she whispered to the memory of her husband. "But I think I need to start living again. I hope you understand." The house remained silent, but Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders nonetheless. Permission, perhaps, whether from Thomas's spirit or simply from herself. Permission to move forward, to embrace whatever came next. 2 weeks later, Rachel sat across from the banker in Belmont, her account books spread on the desk between them. She had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, prepared arguments and pleas and desperate bargains. The numbers were still impossible. She had sold 10 head of cattle, had managed to save a bit from careful budgeting, but she was still $90 short of what she owed. "Mrs. Brennan," the banker said, his expression sympathetic but firm, "I understand your situation, truly I do, but the bank has its own obligations. We cannot simply forgive loans because circumstances have become difficult. I am not asking you to forgive it." Rachel fought to keep her voice steady. "I am asking for an extension, 3 more months. I have another 20 cattle ready for market, and with proper management I can bring in enough to pay everything I owe plus interest. You said the same thing 6 weeks ago when we granted you the first extension, and I have paid what I promised then." Rachel pulled out her carefully documented records. "Here. Every cent accounted for. I have reduced my household expenses by 60%. I have made significant improvements to the property that will increase its value. All I need is a bit more time." The banker, Mr. Wendell Harrison, studied her papers with a critical eye. He was an older man, silver-haired and precise, with a reputation for fairness but also for following rules without exception. "These records are impressively maintained," he acknowledged. "And I see you have made genuine progress. But Mrs. Brennan, I have to ask, how much of this success is yours and how much is because Isaiah Foster has essentially been running your ranch for you?" Heat flooded Rachel's face. "Mr. Foster has been teaching me, not doing the work for me." Every improvement to that property has involved my labor. He has been a good neighbor and a patient instructor, nothing more. I am not questioning your morals, madam. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair. I am questioning the sustainability of your situation. What happens when Isaiah Foster decides he has better things to do than spend all his time propping up his neighbor's failing ranch? Can you truly manage on your own? It was the question Rachel asked herself every night. The ranch was stable now, productive even, but much of that was due to Isaiah's expertise and physical strength. Could she maintain what they had built without him? I am learning more every day, she said firmly. Yes, I have had help, but I am not the ignorant widow I was 4 months ago. I can manage cattle, mend fences, read weather signs, budget resources. Given time, I will be as competent as any rancher in this territory. But you are not there yet. Mr. Harrison tapped the loan documents. And until you are, this bank is taking a significant risk keeping your note active. Rachel's hands clenched in her lap. What are you saying? I am saying that I will grant you one final extension. 2 months, not 3. But if you cannot pay in full by then, the bank will foreclose and sell the property to recoup our losses. And Mrs. Brennan, I strongly suggest you start considering alternatives. A woman alone trying to run a cattle ranch is not a sustainable proposition, no matter how much neighborly help you receive. The dismissal stung, but Rachel forced herself to nod professionally. Thank you for the extension. I will have your money in 2 months. She left the bank with her pride intact but her confidence shaken. 2 months. 60 days to come up with $90 plus whatever additional expenses arose in that time. It was possible, barely, if everything went perfectly and nothing went wrong. Of course, something always went wrong. Rachel was halfway back to her ranch when a rider intercepted her. Young Billy Carter, who worked at the livery stable, was red-faced and breathing hard. Mrs. Brennan, been looking for you. Your cattle broke through the north fence. They are scattered halfway to the mountains. Isaiah Foster sent me to find you. Rachel's stomach dropped. How many got out? Most of them, madam. Maybe 25, 30 head, which meant hours, possibly days, of work to round them up. Work she could not afford to delay because every day those cattle were missing was another day they could get further away, get injured, get stolen by rustlers who roamed the territory looking for easy pickings. Where is Mr. Foster now? Trying to track them with a couple of his ranch hands. He said to tell you to meet him at the North Ridge. Rachel turned her horse and kicked into a gallop. The North Ridge was 3 miles from her house, rough terrain that would be hell to navigate in the growing darkness. But if Isaiah was already pursuing her missing herd, she needed to be there. She found him 2 hours later, along with 2 men she recognized as workers from his ranch. They had managed to gather about 15 cattle into a makeshift pen created from ropes and natural rock formations. How bad is it? Rachel asked without preamble. Isaiah's expression was grim. Bad. The fence did not just break, it was cut. Someone deliberately let your cattle out. The implications hit Rachel like a physical blow. Who would do that? I have suspicions. Isaiah gestured to one of his men. Tom, show her what you found. The ranch hand held up a piece of fabric, torn and dirty but clearly from someone's shirt. It was a distinctive pattern, red and black checked, and Rachel had seen it before. Gerald Matthews, she breathed. Isaiah nodded. He has been making noise around town about how your ranch should be sold. Apparently his cousin wants to buy the land. Gerald Matthews ran a larger spread about 10 miles south. He had made an offer to buy Rachel's ranch 2 weeks after Thomas died, an insultingly low bid that she had refused without hesitation. Since then, he had made several more increasingly aggressive attempts to acquire her property. Can we prove it was him? Rachel asked. Unless he confesses or someone saw him, probably not. Isaiah's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. But I can make it known that we are watching for this kind of sabotage. That might be enough to make him back off. Rachel wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of someone actively sabotaging her attempts to save her home. Instead, she forced herself to focus on the immediate problem. How many cattle are still missing? We think about 10 heads scattered in 3 different directions. We can probably recover most of them over the next few days, but some might be lost permanently. 10 cattle. At current market rates, that was roughly $150 in losses Rachel could not afford. Even if they recovered half, she would still be devastated financially. "We should start searching now," Rachel said, even though exhaustion pulled at her bones. "Every hour we wait, they get further away. Rachel." Isaiah caught her arm gently. "It is almost full dark. Searching in this terrain at night is dangerous for us and the horses. We will start again at first light with a larger search party. I cannot afford to lose those cattle. I know. Which is why we are going to be smart about recovering them." Isaiah's voice was calm but firm. "Running yourself ragged in the dark will not help. Go home, get some rest, eat something. My men will stay here overnight to guard the ones we have already gathered. Tomorrow we will organize a proper search and get back as many as we can." Rachel wanted to argue, but she could see the logic in his words. She was already exhausted from the trip to town, and her horse was worn out from the hard ride to the North Ridge. Stumbling around in the dark would likely make things worse, not better. "First light," she agreed reluctantly, "and I am coming with the search party. I would expect nothing less." Isaiah released her arm, his hand lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "We will fix this, Rachel. I promise." She nodded and turned her horse toward home, but the weight of despair rode with her every step of the way. The next 3 days were a blur of exhausting searches across difficult terrain. Rachel rode alongside Isaiah and his men, learning to track cattle through rocky passages and dense brush. They recovered 7 of the missing cattle, but 3 were simply gone, either taken by rustlers or lost in the vast Wyoming wilderness. The financial loss was crushing, but something else bothered Rachel more. The knowledge that someone was actively working against her, that no matter how hard she fought, there were people who wanted her to fail. It made the already difficult task of saving her ranch feel completely impossible. On the evening of the 3rd day, Rachel sat on her porch watching the sunset and doing calculations in her head that kept coming up short. Even selling every remaining head of cattle would barely cover her debts, leaving her with nothing to rebuild and no way to keep operating the ranch. "You are thinking too loud," Isaiah said, climbing the porch steps with 2 cups of coffee. "I could hear you calculating from the barn." Rachel accepted the cup with a tired smile. "The numbers do not work. Even before we lost those cattle, I was barely going to make the deadline. Now, I do not see any path forward." Isaiah settled into the chair beside her, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "You could marry me." Rachel choked on her coffee. "What? Marry me?" Isaiah repeated, completely calm. "Combine our properties. Your debts become our debts, your ranch becomes our ranch. Problem solved." "That is not a proposal, that is a business transaction. Would you prefer romance?" Isaiah set down his cup and took her hand. "Rachel Brennan, these past months working alongside you have been the happiest I have known in 5 years. You are strong and stubborn and braver than you give yourself credit for. I admire your determination, your refusal to give up even when everything seems impossible." Somewhere along the way, admiration became affection, and affection became something deeper. "I love you, not because you need saving, but because you are someone worth loving. So I am asking, will you marry me? For practical reasons, yes, but also because I genuinely want to spend my life with you." Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. "Thomas has only been gone for months. I know. And if you need more time, I will wait. But Rachel, the bank gave you 2 months to pay or lose everything. We do not have the luxury of a long courtship and a proper mourning period. Sometimes circumstances force our hand." Isaiah squeezed her fingers gently. "This does not have to mean you love Thomas any less. It just means you are choosing to keep living to protect what you both built together. People will talk. People always talk. Let them." Rachel studied their joined hands, her mind spinning through implications and emotions too tangled to easily separate. The practical part of her recognized the sense in Isaiah's proposal. Marriage would solve her immediate financial crisis and give her a true partner in running the ranch. But was that enough foundation for a marriage? "Do you really love me?" she asked quietly. "Or do you just love the idea of not being alone anymore?" Isaiah considered this seriously. "I think it started as the latter and became the former. I noticed you first because we share an understanding of grief and loss. But I fell in love with you, specifically you, as I got to know you. The way you refuse to accept defeat, the way you throw yourself completely into learning new skills, your kindness even when you are exhausted and frustrated. The sound of your laugh when I manage to coax it out. The way you mother those cattle like they are wayward children. I love you, Rachel. As yourself, not as a substitute for loneliness." "I care for you too," Rachel admitted. "More than I expected to, more than I probably should this soon." "But Isaiah, I do not know if that is enough for marriage. What if we are just two desperate people making a terrible decision? Then we will figure it out together." Isaiah brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I am not asking you to have all the answers right now. I am asking you to take a chance on something that might be wonderful, to trust that what we have built these past months is strong enough to build on." Rachel closed her eyes, thinking of Thomas, of the promises they had made to each other. She had sworn to keep fighting for their dream, but maybe that did not mean fighting alone. Maybe accepting help, accepting love, accepting a future different from what she had planned was not betrayal but survival. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible. Then stronger. "Yes, I will marry you." Isaiah's face transformed with a smile that erased years from his weathered features. He stood, pulling Rachel up with him, and for a long moment they simply stood together on the porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I am going to kiss you now," Isaiah said, giving her time to object. Rachel's answer was to rise on her toes and close the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then deeper, carrying all the loneliness and hope and desperate affection they had been holding back. Rachel's hands came up to rest on Isaiah's chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close but not crushing, holding her like something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably get married soon, before I forget how to be a gentleman." Rachel laughed, the sound surprised out of her. "How soon are you thinking? End of the week?" Isaiah grinned at her shocked expression. "I told you we do not have time for a long engagement. Besides, once I make a decision, I do not see the point in delaying." "End of the week," Rachel repeated, trying to wrap her mind around how completely her life was about to change. "That is 5 days. Plenty of time to talk to the preacher and gather witnesses, unless you want something bigger." Rachel thought about the gossip that was already swirling around her, the judgmental looks she received in town, the way people had written her off as a tragic figure doomed to fail. Let them talk. She was going to survive, and if that meant marrying a good man who loved her after only 4 months of widowhood, then that was what she would do. "Small is fine," she said. "Just us and whatever witnesses the law requires. I do not need a spectacle. Then I will arrange everything." Isaiah kissed her again, quick and sweet. "You are not going to regret this, Rachel. I promise I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice. I am holding you to that, Isaiah Foster." They were married 5 days later in the small church in Belmont with the preacher and 2 witnesses present. Rachel wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Thomas had always said brought out her eyes. She felt a pang of guilt as she walked down the aisle toward Isaiah, but it was tempered by a growing sense of rightness. This was survival, yes, but it was also a genuine chance at happiness with a man who had proven his worth through actions, not just words. Isaiah stood waiting for her in clean trousers and a white shirt, his hair freshly cut, his expression almost awed as she approached. When the preacher asked if he would love and cherish Rachel for the rest of his days, Isaiah's "I will" rang through the church with absolute conviction. Rachel's own vows came out shakier, but no less sincere. Whatever uncertainty she felt about the speed of this marriage, she had none about Isaiah's character or intentions. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah's kiss was chaste and respectful, mindful of their small audience. But his eyes promised more for later, and Rachel felt heat flood her cheeks. They signed the necessary papers, accepted stiff congratulations from the witnesses, and then rode together back to what was now their combined property. "Your place or mine?" Isaiah asked with a slight smile as they approached the boundary between their ranches. "Yours is larger and better maintained," Rachel said practically. "Though I hate to abandon the house Thomas and I built, we do not have to abandon it. We can use it for storage or for housing ranch hands eventually, or we can sell it separately if we need the money." Isaiah reached across the distance between their horses to take her hand. "This is our life now, Rachel. We make decisions together. Nothing is set in stone unless we both agree." It was a generous statement, and Rachel appreciated it more than she could easily express. "Then I suppose we should go to your ranch, husband." "Our ranch," Isaiah corrected. "Everything I have is yours now, too." They rode together toward the house that would be Rachel's new home, and for the first time in months, she felt something like hope. That night, after a simple dinner and hours of conversation about practical matters like combining their herds and managing their joint finances, Isaiah led Rachel to his bedroom with gentle courtesy. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I know this has all happened very fast. I can sleep in the spare room if you need more time." Rachel had been nervous all day about this moment, but looking at Isaiah now, seeing the genuine care in his eyes, her anxiety eased. "I want to be your wife in all ways. It feels strange being with someone other than Thomas, but it also feels right, like this is where I am supposed to be now." Isaiah kissed her softly. "If at any point you want to stop, just tell me. There is no rush, no expectations. We have the rest of our lives." He undressed her carefully, reverently, as if she were something breakable and precious. Rachel did the same for him, her hands trembling slightly as she revealed the body of this man who was now her husband. He was broader than Thomas, more heavily muscled from years of ranch work, with scars that told stories of hard living. "You are beautiful," Isaiah murmured against her skin as he laid her down on the bed. Rachel wanted to protest that she was too thin from months of hard work and inadequate meals, too marked by sun and labor to be beautiful. But the way Isaiah looked at her silenced the objections. He saw her as beautiful, and maybe that was enough. Their joining was gentle at first. Isaiah careful with her as if afraid she might shatter. But Rachel urged him on, needing the connection, the affirmation that she was alive and capable of feeling joy again. When pleasure finally crashed through her, it brought tears along with it, a release of months of tension and grief and fear. Isaiah held her afterward as she cried, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances. "I have you. You are safe. We are going to be all right." Rachel clung to him and believed it. The following weeks brought adjustment and learning as they merged their lives. Rachel moved her belongings to Isaiah's larger house, combining their households into something new. They fell into routines of shared labor, working the combined ranches with greater efficiency than either had managed alone. The gossip in Belmont was predictably harsh. Rachel heard the whispers when she went to town for supplies, that she had married indecently fast, that she must have been carrying on with Isaiah even before Thomas died, that she was a shameless woman who had never properly loved her first husband. It stung, but Rachel held her head high. Let them think what they wanted. She was surviving, even thriving, and that was worth more than the good opinion of people who had never offered real help when she needed it. 6 weeks after their marriage, Rachel and Isaiah drove their combined herd to market. The sale brought in more than enough to pay off the bank loan, with money left over for improvements and savings. Standing in the bank as she made the final payment, watching Mr. Harrison mark her account as paid in full, Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten what freedom felt like. "Congratulations, Mrs. Foster," the banker said, his tone considerably warmer now that she was no longer a financial risk. "You have done well for yourself." "We have done well," Rachel corrected, nodding toward Isaiah who waited by the door. "My husband and I together." That night, they celebrated with a nice dinner at the hotel restaurant in Belmont. It was the first time since Thomas's death that Rachel had done something purely for pleasure rather than necessity, and she reveled in the simple joy of good food and better company. "I have been thinking," Isaiah said over dessert, "about what we want our future to look like. We have been so focused on survival that we have not talked about our actual dreams." Rachel set down her fork. "What are your dreams?" "A family," Isaiah said without hesitation. "I want children, a house full of noise and chaos and love. I want to build something lasting, something we can pass down to the next generation." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "But I know that is a lot to ask. You married me for practical reasons as much as romantic ones." "If children are not what you want, we can still have a good life." "I want children too," Rachel said softly. "Thomas and I planned for them. That was one of the hardest parts of losing him, losing the future family we had imagined together. But Isaiah, I am not that innocent girl anymore. I know now how hard this life is, how much work children would add to an already difficult existence. Are we really ready for that? I think we can handle anything together." Isaiah reached across the table to take her hand. "But there is no rush. We have time to build our foundation stronger before we add children to it. I just wanted you to know that when you are ready, I very much want that future with you." Rachel squeezed his fingers, warmth spreading through her chest. "I think I might already be ready. Or at least, I do not want to wait too long. We are not getting any younger, and like you said, we never know how much time we have." Isaiah's smile was radiant. "Then we will start trying, and whatever happens, happens in its own time." 3 months later, Rachel stood in the kitchen of her home, her hand pressed against her still flat stomach, and felt terror and joy in equal measure. The doctor in Belmont had confirmed what she had suspected for the past 2 weeks. She was carrying Isaiah's child. Isaiah's reaction when she told him that evening was everything she could have hoped for. He spun her around the kitchen, laughing, before remembering himself and setting her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" Rachel asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it." Isaiah cupped her face in his hands. "Terrified, too, if I am being honest. After losing Mary and our baby, the thought of going through that again scares me. But Rachel, I have never wanted anything more than I want this child with you." Rachel understood his fear because she shared it. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here far from proper medical care. But she also knew they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Rachel continued working the ranch as long as she was able, gradually shifting to lighter tasks as her body changed. Isaiah became almost comically protective, worrying over her constantly in ways that were both endearing and occasionally irritating. "I am pregnant, not dying," Rachel reminded him when he insisted she rest instead of helping with the evening feeding. "Women have been having babies while working ranches since the beginning of time." "Not my wife carrying my baby," Isaiah countered. "Humor me, Rachel. I need to feel like I am doing something useful." She relented because she could see the genuine fear beneath his overprotectiveness. The anniversary of his first wife's death had passed just weeks before Rachel discovered her pregnancy, bringing back painful memories. If fussing over Rachel helped him cope, she could endure it. Spring arrived with warmth and new growth, and Rachel's body grew heavy with the child she carried. In late April, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, her labor began. Isaiah rode hard for the midwife who lived 5 miles away, leaving Rachel with Emma Peterson, the nearest neighbor woman who had come to help. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the next day. Rachel had never known such pain, such exhaustion, such fear that something would go wrong. But when dawn broke on the second day, her son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his determination to live. The midwife placed the squalling infant on Rachel's chest, and she fell instantly, irrevocably in love. Isaiah, who had spent the last hours pacing holes in the floor, rushed in at the baby's first cry. He stopped dead at the sight of Rachel cradling their son, tears streaming down his weathered face. "We have a boy," Rachel said, her voice hoarse from hours of screaming. "A healthy, strong boy." Isaiah sank to his knees beside the bed, one hand gently touching the baby's dark, downy head. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas Isaiah Foster, honoring both the past and the future. Little Thomas had his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's stubborn determination, evident even in infancy. Recovery was slow, but Rachel had help. Isaiah took over the household completely for the first weeks, managing everything from cooking to laundry to caring for the ranch. Neighbor women stopped by with food and advice, showing a kindness Rachel had not expected given how they had judged her hasty marriage. "A baby changes how people see you," Emma Peterson explained when Rachel commented on the shift. "You are not a scandalous widow anymore. You are a mother, a respectable married woman building a family. People can understand that." Rachel supposed she should be bitter about the conditional nature of that acceptance, but she found she did not care. She had her son, her husband, her ranch. The good opinion of Belmont residents was nice but not necessary. As the months passed, and Thomas grew from infant to baby to toddler, Rachel's life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch prospered under their joint management. They added to their herd, improved their facilities, and earned a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealings. 2 years after Thomas's birth, Rachel gave Isaiah a daughter. They named her Mary Grace, after Isaiah's first wife, and the gesture seemed to heal something in Isaiah that had remained broken. He cried when Rachel suggested the name, holding his newborn daughter and whispering to her about the woman she was named for. "I want her to know that loving her does not mean forgetting Mary," Isaiah told Rachel later, "that we can honor the past while building our future." "I think Mary would have loved that," Rachel said, meaning it. They had more children over the years, each one welcomed and cherished. The house that had once seemed too large for one grieving man filled with the noise and chaos Isaiah had dreamed of. Rachel watched their children grow surrounded by love and security, learning the ranch work that had once seemed impossibly difficult to her. On their 10th anniversary, Isaiah and Rachel stood together on the porch of their home watching their 4 children play in the yard. Thomas, now 10, was teaching his younger siblings how to rope fence posts. Mary, age 8, was bossing her brothers around with the authority of someone who knew her own mind. The twins, Joseph and Ruth, age 5, were attempting to follow their older siblings' instructions with varying degrees of success. "You ever regret it?" Rachel asked, leaning against Isaiah's solid warmth. "Marrying me so quickly, taking on my debts and problems." Isaiah wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Not for a single moment. You have given me everything I ever wanted and things I did not know to dream of. These children, this life, this love. How could I regret any of it?" "I was so afraid back then," Rachel admitted. "Afraid of losing everything, afraid of depending on anyone, afraid of moving forward. If you had not been so stubborn about helping me whether I wanted it or not, I would have lost the ranch and probably ended up working in some boarding house in town." "Your pride was impressive," Isaiah agreed with a laugh. "Terrifying, but impressive. I knew from the first time I met you that you were going to be a challenge. And you like challenges. I like you." Isaiah turned her in his arms to face him. "I loved you then and I love you now. Every stubborn, proud, beautiful piece of you." Rachel kissed him, still feeling the flutter of excitement that his touch had sparked from the beginning. "I love you too. More than I ever thought possible when you showed up uninvited to fix my fence. Best decision I ever made, inserting myself into your business." "Second best," Rachel corrected. "The best decision was proposing marriage, true." Isaiah glanced toward their children, his expression soft with contentment. "Though I think you accepting me is what really made the difference." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their legacy play out before them. The ranch spread in all directions, prosperous and well-maintained. The cattle grazed peacefully on land that Rachel and Thomas had first claimed that she had nearly lost, that Isaiah had helped her save. It was a life built from grief and determination, from unexpected love and stubborn hope. Young Thomas looked up from his roping practice and waved. "Papa, Mama, watch me." They watched as their eldest son successfully lassoed the fence post, his face lighting with pride at the accomplishment. Mary clapped enthusiastically while the twins demanded to try next. "We did well," Rachel murmured. "We did," Isaiah agreed, "and we are not done yet. The years continued to be good to them." Their children grew strong and capable, learning the ranching life from parents who worked as true partners. Thomas showed a particular aptitude for working with cattle, while Mary proved to have a head for numbers and business that would have made her grandfather proud. The twins were inseparable, sharing the kind of bond that only twins could understand. As their children reached adolescence, and then adulthood, Rachel and Isaiah began to step back slightly from the day-to-day operations, training the next generation to eventually take over. It was a gradual process, filled with pride in their children's growing competence and occasional wistfulness for the days when those children had been small enough to need their constant attention. Thomas, their eldest, married at 22, bringing his bride Abigail to live on a portion of the ranch that Isaiah and Rachel deeded to him. It gave Rachel particular satisfaction to know that the land she had nearly lost would stay in the family, passed down to future generations. Mary proved more interested in education than ranching, eventually moving to Denver to attend a women's college. It was hard to see her go, but Rachel recognized her daughter's fierce independence as something she had inherited directly. Let Mary make her own path, carve out her own dreams. That was the whole point of the security Rachel and Isaiah had worked so hard to build. The twins split their interests, with Joseph helping Thomas run the cattle operation while Ruth focused on breeding horses, developing a line of quality quarter horses that became known throughout the territory. Rachel was 48 years old when she became a grandmother for the first time. Thomas and Abigail named their son Isaiah, and when Rachel held the tiny infant, she marveled at the circle of life that had brought them here. From desperate widow to matriarch of a growing family, the journey had been harder than anything she could have imagined, but also more rewarding. Isaiah, now 52, took to grandparenthood with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything. He spoiled little Isaiah shamelessly, carving toys and telling stories, and generally being the kind of grandfather every child deserved. "You are going to ruin him," Rachel teased, watching Isaiah let the toddler help with chores in ways that actually made everything take 3 times longer. "That is my job as grandfather," Isaiah countered. "You and Thomas can be the responsible parents. I get to be the fun one." Rachel shook her head but did not actually object. Seeing Isaiah so happy, so fulfilled, was worth any amount of spoiled grandchildren. More grandchildren followed as their other children married and started families. The ranch that had once been too quiet became a bustling center of activity, with 3 generations living and working the land. Rachel loved the noise and chaos, the sense of continuity and legacy. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. The house filled with family and friends, with children running everywhere and food covering every available surface. Looking around the crowded room, Rachel felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Speech. Someone called out and the cry was taken up by others. Rachel looked at Isaiah, who nodded encouragingly. She stood, waiting for the room to quiet. 25 years ago, I married this man in a rush, out of desperation as much as affection, Rachel began. I was a widow drowning in debt, too proud to ask for help but desperately needing it. Isaiah provided that help without being asked, and then he offered me partnership when I had nothing to give in return. Everyone thought we were crazy, that I was marrying too fast, that he was taking on an impossible burden. And maybe we were crazy, but if so, it was the best kind of crazy. She paused, reaching for Isaiah's hand. These 25 years have brought challenges I never anticipated and joys I never dared to dream of. We built something lasting from very little, created a family and legacy that will extend long past our own lives. And we did it together, as true partners in every sense. So here is to my husband, my friend, my love. Thank you for being stubborn enough to help a widow who was too proud to ask. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Isaiah pulled Rachel close and kissed her soundly, to the delight of their children and the scandalized giggles of their grandchildren. Here is to the next 25 years, Isaiah said when he finally released her. At least, Rachel agreed. They had 15 more years together before Isaiah's heart gave out one spring morning. He died as he had lived, working the land he loved, surrounded by the family he had cherished. Rachel, now 67, grieved the loss of her partner with the same intensity she had once grieved Thomas, but without the same desperation. Isaiah had lived a full life, had seen his children and grandchildren thrive, had left a legacy that would endure. She buried him on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree where they had often sat together watching the sunset. The funeral drew people from miles around, testament to the respect Isaiah had earned through decades of honest, generous living. Rachel's children wanted her to move in with one of them, to retire from ranching and spend her remaining years in comfort. But Rachel was not ready to stop yet. She continued living in the house she had shared with Isaiah, helping with the ranch work as much as her aging body allowed, teaching her grandchildren the skills that Isaiah had once taught her. She lived another 12 years, watching her great-grandchildren be born, seeing her family grow to numbers she could barely keep track of. When Rachel finally passed at 79, it was peacefully in her sleep, in the bed she had shared with Isaiah for 25 years. They buried her beside Isaiah under the cottonwood tree. By then, the ranch had expanded to over 1,000 acres, run by the third and fourth generations of the family Rachel and Isaiah had built. Their legacy extended far beyond land and cattle, though. It lived in the values they had instilled in their children: hard work, partnership, the importance of helping others even when they were too proud to ask. Young Isaiah, now a man in his 40s running the main ranch operation, stood at his grandmother's funeral and told stories of her fierce independence, her stubborn pride, her generous heart. He spoke of how she had nearly lost everything, but had been saved by accepting help from a neighbor who refused to take no for an answer. How that beginning had blossomed into a love story that shaped generations. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around Rachel's grave after the service, and the eldest among them, Mary's daughter Catherine, placed a hand on the stone marker. "We are who we are because of what they built," Catherine said quietly. Because Grandma Rachel was brave enough to accept help, and Grandpa Isaiah was kind enough to offer it without being asked. That is the real inheritance they left us. Not land or cattle or money, but the knowledge that we are stronger together than we ever could be alone. The family stood together in the fading light, 3 generations bound by the love story of a widow too proud to ask for help and the cowboy who helped anyway. Their legacy stretched out across the Wyoming Territory, in the land they had tended, the children they had raised, the values they had lived. Rachel Brennan Foster had started with nothing but pride and determination. She had ended with everything that truly mattered: love, family, a life well lived. It was more than enough. It was everything. The cottonwood tree grew strong above their joined graves, its branches spreading wide to shelter the family that gathered beneath it for generations to come. And if sometimes in the spring, when the wind blew just right, it seemed to carry the echo of laughter and whispered promises of forever, well, some legacies extend beyond death, living on in the hearts of those who remember. Rachel and Isaiah's story became family legend, told and retold with each new generation. The details might change in the telling, growing more dramatic or more romantic depending on who was sharing the tale. But the heart of it remained constant. 2 people who found each other when they needed it most, who built something lasting from grief and determination, who proved that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom, and that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the ranch more than 100 years later, still told the story of the widow and the cowboy, still understood that the land beneath their feet was won and kept through partnership, through refusing to give up, through being brave enough to love again after loss. It was a good legacy, the best kind, the kind that lasted forever.